This is part of our Irish Studies seminar series, and it takes the form today of a book launch. I'm absolutely delighted that we're able to launch this wonderful new book by Liz DeYoung, Power, Politics and Territory in the New Northern Ireland. So the sequence of events today is the book's going to be launched by Professor Marianne Elliott. So I'm going to introduce Marianne in just a minute. Liz is then going to say a few words about the book and the background to the book as well. We have, sorry, Marissa, yes? Yes. So Marissa McMahon is then going to follow up and say a few words about the project and about the book to finish. And then we're going to go outside. There'll be some drinks and a wine reception outside after we finish with the formal sign of proceedings. Okay, there is another seat just there.
Well, no, you can take that off, Bryce, because Peter wants me to stay up here. So just take that coat off. Just lights on.
Maybe we should. Okay, maybe we should kill the projector. Okay, right. So without further ado, let me introduce Marianne Elliott, who's going to introduce the book. Marianne is Professor Emerita of History and former Director of the Institute of Irish Studies at the University of Liverpool. As I'm sure most of you are aware, she's extremely widely published in a very wide range of Irish history, from the 18th century right through to the very recent past, and she's written also on contemporary politics of Northern Ireland. Her earliest work was on the history of the United Irishmen, with Partners in the Revolution, the United Irishmen in France in 1982, and Wolfe Tone, Prophet of Irish Independence in 1989, and also a biography of Robert Emmet in 2003. And her more wide-ranging work has moved into the area of studies of the Catholics of Ulster, a history, in 2000, and When God Took Sides, Religion and Identity in Ireland, 2009, and then most recently, a return to Belfast, an extremely enjoyable book, Heartlands, a memoir of the White City housing estate in Belfast, which came out in 2017. So Marianne has also supervised the dissertation from which the book has arisen. So no one better, I think, to speak to introduce today's book. So Marianne, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. If you think this isn't working, because I'd rather stand up. Well, all of you academics in this audience will recognise the day that I first met Liz DeYoung. It was one of those awful days where low-level administrators were forcing more box ticking, and I was trying to explain, and I was really fed up. And then I was told that this young woman who wanted to come and work with me from Queen's University Belfast had just arrived, and she walked into my office. And I thought, oh my goodness, I have never seen anybody looking elegant in Doc Marten boots. But she sure did. She sure did. And Liz, any of you who know her, she's just a bright light. You know, she just brings brightness wherever she comes. And so when you read this book, which is extraordinarily hard-hitting, you think, oh my goodness, is this lovely young girl, you know, that walks about everywhere in Doc Marten, but I've told her off, she's got no Doc Marten. But she had already sent me her master's, which she'd done here in Queen's. And when I read it, I thought, I said to myself, this is amazing. I've never come across a young scholar that writes this well. She writes so well, and so she started with me, but unfortunately I retired the following year, and then she finished off with Pete Sherlow and Kevin Bean. But she's somebody that I've been supporting all of. Anyway, another thing that kind of hit me reading her book was she was describing her description of Belfast. Nobody here knows the Belfast streets as well as Liz DeYoung. I guarantee that. It is extraordinary. She says that she wore out 4 pairs of Doc Marten boots walking around the streets of Belfast, and not just North Belfast where she was working on, but it's a walking map described of the whole of Belfast. And I'm just about to finish off a book on East Belfast at the moment, and I'm going to go back and retrace your steps because I don't know that as well as you. So when Liz came and started working on this PhD thesis, and we kept in touch through the years, and thankfully her thesis was so amazing that Liverpool University Press took it up. And let me tell you what's amazing about this book. It is the most recent study of why the peace process is going wrong. It is so hard-hitting. And I know it's hard looking at her and think that, you know. So here was an area that had been former military barracks, so 25 acres, 24 acres?
27.
Oh, even more. 27 acres in an area that is in the top 5% of the most deprived areas in the whole of Northern Ireland. And through the peace process, this 27 acres suddenly became available, and everybody looked at it. Sorely needed social housing, a few amenities, but largely social housing. And we'd all hoped, because I come from North Belfast, historically it's a very mixed religion area, not quite so much now, but still is. And it just seemed a wonderful opportunity to restore some of the character to that area. And this is the area that Liz has written about. She's worked very, very closely with all the community workers, with the people on the ground, the people who needed the social housing, who wanted to see their area, because all of you will know as well, who know Belfast, that it was one of the murder miles of Belfast. That whole near inner city part of North Belfast. When I was sitting on Peace Commission way back in 1993, the Irish News did an amazing survey of all the households in this particular area. And there wasn't one house that hadn't had at least one, and sometimes multiple members of the family murdered in sectarian paramilitary murders. Terrible area, you know, that needed justice. And what happened? Sadly, the politicians got hold of this. And then the much talked about sectarian carve-up that we're hearing about so much, the original vision was lost. The social housing wasn't built apart from a few. There's another sports centre that, you know, the area didn't really need, that the people can't afford. And unfortunately, it's reverting back into the socially deprived, flea sniffing, multiple deprivation that should have been resolved. And that's the story she tells. And my goodness, some of the politicians involved, they need to read it, because she doesn't pull any punches. It's extraordinarily courageous. So I'm going to hand over to her, and she was such a joy to work with. And Diane Urquhart was here as well, will remember, you know, when she turned up with this. And I was always very grateful that Queen's released you. And just for her, when she's just starting on, you know, she's been, although this is her first book, thankfully she's got a wonderful post as a research scientist in the University of Pennsylvania, because she's very committed. She's very idealistic as well, and committed to the whole idea of a minimum wage. And of course, we're talking about that over the whole world, and it's really refreshing to find out that they're seriously studying it in the United States. It's not very often we hear good things about the United States nowadays, but Liz DeYoung is one of their best exports.
so much, Marianne, for that introduction. There were many people who brought this book to life, and to whom I'd like to express my sincere thanks. First to Professor Marianne Elliott, who encouraged me to write it in the first place. Pete Sherlow and Kevin Bean at Liverpool, who supported my PhD research, and all the community workers and activists here in Belfast who were so kind to me and who so graciously opened their worlds to me during this research. I'm grateful to the team at Liverpool University Press who guided the whole writing process along, and to Kathy Devlin and Peter Gray who have planned and warmly hosted this event today. It's so lovely to be back at Queen's. I did my master's here at the Institute of Irish Studies. My family, friends, my partner Brendan, who's here today, who've been steadfast supporters on this long path. And to each of you, I see so many faces in this room, familiar faces, and I'm so thrilled and grateful and happy to see all of you here to support me. So thank you so much for coming. So I arrived in Belfast when I was 20 years old, and something about the city really just drew me in completely. I was alone in the city, and I would walk for hours and hours through the rain, up the falls and down the Shankill and around the docks and the graveyards. I haunted the pubs. I struck up conversations with strangers. I made friends, and I eventually made a life here. So for many years, and it was all because really of this one walk I took where I stumbled on an old army barracks in North Belfast. And I remember this walk because I was so embarrassed and awkward. I was hopelessly lost. And this was a time before Google Maps. I was trying to cut through side streets, and I was foiled every time by this random metal barrier, which I just couldn't figure out. And I found later that the metal sheeting there was the perimeter of the old Girdwood Army Barracks. And over the years that followed, I became committed to and perhaps obsessed with piecing together the story of this land and this old barracks site. So just to kind of frame it a little bit about Girdwood, this is a now demilitarized army barracks. It sits in highly contested territory between several segregated and, as Marianne mentioned, multiply deprived neighborhoods. And so when the site was demilitarized, it had initially offered this incredible opportunity in the wake of the Good Friday Agreement to put the promises of the peace process into practice. This was 27 acres, as we've said, of land to build on. It was space to invest in communities that had been marginalized and alienated, to employ transformative peace-building practices, and perhaps most importantly, to build social housing. North Belfast has long experienced disinvestment, a severe housing crisis, and thousands have languished on the waiting list. For years, activist group Participation in the Practice of Rights, who is here, Marissa is here with me today, had campaigned for a human rights-based approach to development of Girdwood, which included social housing. There were other community groups around the site as well, some of whom are here today, and who advocated for resources targeted to the needs of residents around the site. And all of this work fell on deaf ears. The power-sharing government, led by the DUP and Sinn Féin, as many of you know, was more concerned with identity politics than and trade-off rather than a meaningful transformation of the space. And so their squabbles around territory and territorial claim and tit-for-tat politics eventually squandered the site's transformative potential. So after 11 years and £11.7 million of peace-building money from the EU, a leisure centre, the Girdwood Community Hub, opened in 2016 on the site. And there were playing fields, there were 60 houses built towards the back. And I argue in the book that the building is really a white elephant. It has done little for the surrounding area, and the 60 houses weren't enough. I argue they were built, in the context of a housing crisis. And if nothing else, the book highlights that there should have been more housing on 27 acres of land in the midst of a housing crisis. And this alone was a missed opportunity due purely to sectarianism. Over many years, I was able to follow and observe the whole redevelopment process as it unfolded from Army Barracks to Community Hub. And my access was facilitated largely in part to the generosity of community workers and people around the site, activists to whom I'm very grateful. They invited me to meetings and working sessions year on year, kind of, just to put up with me as I showed up at every meeting. They let me tag along on community outings. They offered me many cups of tea and many conversations. And I kept walking as well and tracing the geography of the area and how it was shifting and changing. So this book is partly informed by my experience in Belfast, my long rambling walks, the detailed field notes and the journal entries that I wrote over close to 7 years. So it's partly a travel log. I wanted to bring the reader along with me on these walks and situate them in the city and in that neighborhood of North Belfast. But this book is also an important critique. It levels that the Barracks development is really an allegory for what happened with the peace process and the failure of politics to deliver a shared future for the people of Northern Ireland. It suggests that the same political dynamics that shaped Girdwood, the intransigence of the DUP, Sinn Féin's willingness to compromise, led to the Assembly's spectacular series of collapses. And I wanted to hold politicians to account. I wanted to put these uncomfortable truths in print, that power sharing has failed under the DUP and Sinn Féin, that there should have been housing at Girdwood, there should have been resources, there are thousands of people still on the waiting list, there's a mental health crisis happening, and the same political dynamics that built this leisure centre have, left Northern Ireland adrift during the pandemic, during Brexit, and the same dynamics have failed to tackle the continuing housing crisis, the cost of living crisis, health, public services that are now stretched to breaking point. And we saw that, last week with the strike of public service workers. So although the Girdwood hub, every time I go there, it's sitting empty and the Assembly is silent, neither are doing much for their surrounding area. New voices and demands have sprung up in Northern Ireland. PPR has continued to organize. Local movements have formed around Irish language rights, equal marriage, bodily autonomy, refugee and asylum seekers' rights, climate justice. Community groups are still working to fill the systemic gaps that are left by politicians. More recently, there's been an enormous swell of support and solidarity in response to the humanitarian crisis in Palestine here, and all of these forces are visible on the streets and in the neighborhoods of Belfast. So the book's cover is a picture that was taken of the Barracks before its redevelopment by local photographer Thomas McMahon, and when it's kind of sat in limbo because of political dispute. And that was when I ran across it, when it was still a vacant lot. And as you open the cover, my friend observed, it's kind of like opening the gate into the development itself. And that was my hope. My hope is this book provides a glimpse at the inner workings of not only the Girdwood site, but of post-agreement in Northern Ireland and all of its convoluted twists and turns. I wanted to bring the reader on a walk, like the ones I used to take, and traverse Belfast's divides and move from the past and into the present day. And so with that, I'd like to invite Marissa McMahon, who's joined us here tonight from PPR and the Take Back the City campaign, to talk a little bit about what's happening in the present day, the legacy of Girdwood for housing justice and for the future of Belfast, Northern Ireland, that the politicians have let fail. So thank you for the introduction.
Thank you. Thanks very much, and thanks for having me here this evening. So, just to echo what Marianne did, it's a phenomenal. I first asked Liz, why? We thought we were the only crackers ones, like me and Alfie and out in the room, who were super interested in things like empty land that nobody seems to want to do anything proper on, until we met Liz. And unbeknownst to me, that when Liz was here researching this, I was not an organizer with PPR. I was a campaign member with a toddler on my hip, campaigning for somewhere decent to live that didn't have pigeon waste and raw sewage coming up my sinks in my bath, and being told that what more do you want? And Girdwood was one of the places that we were asking, well, why can't this be redeveloped into something that would benefit those most in need? PPR, just quickly, was set up back in 2006, you know, post Good Friday Agreement by an absolutely formidable woman, Inez McCormick, who already seen that the dividends of our so-called peace process was not reaching those most in need. In particular, focused on North Belfast because at the time it had the highest waiting list for housing, still up there in terms of need, and the highest suicide rate. So in terms of mental health, it's also the most segregated. Like out of the 99 peace barriers, 44 of them are concentrated in North Belfast, so it's the most carved up. And unfortunately, like both these, not an awful lot has changed in that sense. So to have Liz's book talk about Girdwood in particular is a microcosm of our entire peace process, but also to delve in, and there's some amount of research, and I don't know how your head hasn't exploded going in and out of all of how you've done that between Hansard and Create. I mean, it's phenomenal. It's a phenomenal piece of work that I know in PPR we alone appreciate like twofold, because it's something that we never could have even dreamed of would have been wrote and, you know, accepted the way your book has. So thank you so much for that. But you're not finished, because Liz mentioned Take Back the City, and we've just spoke about how she's going to write another book based on Mackey's. So Mackey's, as I say, not unlike Girdwood, 25 acres in West Belfast, which is currently the highest need for homes in the 6 counties, that has been land vacant for, I don't know, 20 odd years, more maybe, where we have children growing up in a hostel or a single act, so somewhere that's never their own, where we have people coming into this country seeking asylum or put in hotels and told that's your home. It is effectively a prison with the saying in and out of, or you can't even cook food, being moved from pillar to post. And so Take Back the City grew out of the likes of Girdwood, Seven Towers Residents Group, Equality Can't Wait, Build Homes Now, into a coalition of people and experts, including architects and planners and academics from Queen's, and families most in need of homes in the city, to envisage what a sustainable community would look like. And we've been very, very lucky in that people have invested money in us to develop that, and we have an architect called Matthew Lloyd who has developed a phenomenal plan for the area, against all odds. It is something that we believe, and not just us, and the people in that field of work believe that it can and should happen, and would be something that would put Belfast on the map for various reasons. So a bit like Girdwood, a ton of peace money was thrown into what is effectively a greenway from one end of like Paisley Park round down, coming out into Springfield Road. And PPR supported 2 families to take judicial reviews around that, because again, looking at the quality of impact assessment, in section 75, whilst nobody is disputing the fact that we need green space, we do, and an awful lot more of it, but not at the cost of 45,000 people waiting to be housed in this area in 6 counties. So at the minute, Take Back the City are currently running a campaign to have the land rezoned, because again, looking at the politics, we're told it's zoned for industrial use, but it was rezoned for green space quite quickly and easily. So why can't it be rezoned for mixed use, where our kids, and I say this, like our young people aged 4 up, had a better vision for that piece of land than some of the people in power in our country. So that's been turned into a somewhat of a reality, where there is plans, and you can go on takebackthecity.ie and have a look at these plans and have a look at how far they've come, have a look at the principles that are outlined for them plans. It wasn't just something that was presented to people. The people of that area, of both communities, of our new community, had a say in what that plan should look like. So Liz thinks she's done, but she's definitely not done. She's coming back to write that story up, aren't you, Liz? Aren't you, Liz? You still haven't said yes. I said 3 times. I've asked you today.
I'll come back any day. You'll have me.
But as in all seriousness, like we are hoping to take the lessons that came from Girdwood and spin that on its head and show how you can live sustainably that will tackle cost of living crisis, the climate crisis, and our current housing crisis, because doing what we've always done isn't working. It's what is it? The definition of insanity, isn't it? Expecting a different outcome. So that's what we're about. Well, I hope that's what we're about.
Thanks very much, Marianne, Liz, and Marissa. We can take a few questions, yeah?
Thank you all three of you for your presentation. I'm going to say who I am first, and I'm going to ask the question. I used to be a community worker in North Belfast working on housing issues, and I left in about 95. So at that point, it was already known that Girdwood was coming on stream, and that Girdwood was, the territorial army who moved out, the British Army was just left, and it was coming on stream, and it was understood that the deal would be a small amount of mixed-use business units that would meet the needs of both communities, and that most of the land would be used as housing, social housing land, that would take the pressure off the enterprises in North Belfast for a Catholic population because of the huge demand. And I suppose my question to you is what was the crunch moment at which that was lost? Did you uncover that?
Yes, yeah, there were several phases of development for the Girdwood process as it dragged on for years. And, I looked into that first phase of development when the site was first demilitarized. And at the time, there was the Dunlop report as well, which had recommended, North Belfast needs some kind of transformative development, along with the housing, along with the services. And so at different points, there were visions for Girdwood to be a mixed-use site that would bring in the Crumlin Road Jail and courthouse. And at one point, Prony was possible, earmarked for North Belfast. Believe it or not, that had been floated for the Girdwood site. And there was a master plan. There was a draft master plan that had been drawn up, and there was a working group around it, and it included mixed-use space, different resources, social housing. But the social housing issue was really the sticking point. They couldn't agree on how much, where it should be. And the real nail in the coffin for that phase of development was the economic crash, because the idea was that this would perhaps, be funded by private investment. And so with the economic crash, that first phase of Girdwood, which was, let's turn this into something transformative, it just all kind of stopped, and the site sat in stasis for years before the EU Piece 3 money came through. So.
Yeah.
Me? Okay, thanks, Liz. And well, first of all, I wanted to apologize to Professor Elliott for interrupting her introduction, but well, the lady I invited over lives next to Girdwood, that I believe it's important she would be comfortably seated. So, and I hope she says a word later on as well. But what I wanted to say is, Liz, as your biggest fan, I just wanted to, well, it's a question really to both Liz and Marissa. Now, I was at your book launch at Kulturan on Saturday, and obviously listened to whatever you had to say yesterday, today, and I obviously read your PhD many times, which I believe is excellent, even though I don't agree with pieces of it. But the question is, both today and on Saturday, you expressed criticism of identity politics, of community politics, taking precedence over individual human rights and whatever housing is and all that. And my question would be to both Liz and Marissa, what would be the realistic alternative to what happened? You criticized all the backroom deals, which were inevitable there. The question is, what would be the realistic alternative to what happened, and isn't Girdwood as it is really the best possible thing that might happen? Because we are talking about areas which lie directly on the Meter Mile. There were many people. Well, basically, it's by no means a glorification of violence or whatever. What I'll say now, but people on either side were killed for their right to hold their area, and people on both sides, and that must be said, were prepared to kill for what they saw as maintaining their right to stay on that area. So realistically, from what I could gather from what you said on Saturday and today, is that the ideal scenario would be building as much houses as possible and allocating them in accordance with it. Well, if they would be allocated in accordance with objective need or whatever, realistically it would be predominantly allocated to the Catholic population. That would mean extending the greater Miloš area. Well, the greater Miloš, obviously, Kinar, whatever they call, all the way to Clifton Park Avenue. My question is, do you, Liz, and Marissa as well, genuinely believe that if that happens, nothing would happen? It would be just quiet and people could live normally? Because in my opinion, if that happens, if housing would be built all the way up to Clifton Park Avenue, and it would be allocated mostly to people from the Catholic nationalist background, then that perimeter wall would have to stay there, essentially. So what was the realistic alternative?
Yeah, I think it's, it's difficult to say realistic, because as you say, there are many issues here and they're all competing. I feel like I could go in a million different directions with this question. But, if you're taking Girdwood as what it was meant to be, which is, the significant opportunity to bring the promises of the agreement and the act, the Northern Ireland Act, into practice, it specifically states equality of opportunity, that people, regardless of their religious or ethnic background, should, receive the resources that they need. And, so if Girdwood was going to be built according to the legislation that Northern Ireland was supposed to be built on, then yes, there should have been more houses, because the objective need was great. I think to the Girdwood, if you even take the housing issue off the table and look at the Girdwood site purely from like a planning perspective, as to how do we redevelop this site in a way that's responsive to the needs of people in their communities. And, that kind of stitches together that area of lower North Belfast, which has been decimated by the motorway, disinvested. The way that the site was built was just completely wrong. There was no complexity to it, the way that the Mackey's plans have been put forth, for instance, where you have, a mix of green space and housing and places for people to walk and live. And so I think, without having community input into what that design looks like, it failed there as well. So I agree, this was an impossible site to begin with. Nobody, you were never going to make everyone happy with the Girdwood site because of where it's located, because it's so contested. And so I agree, that thinking realistically, this was always going to be a tricky issue. But I think it's still worth, critiquing why it didn't happen according to the way it was promised, and why it didn't follow. What's the point of having the peace agreement in the legislation if you're not going to follow it?
What's the point?
I don't know what Marissa would respond to.
Again, for me, personally, even setting aside the PPR, my response to that would be, so what do we do? Do we just keep it as it is going forward? Do we just have these contested spaces and a growing waiting list of people who are in dire need of homes? Because at one point we're not going to have anywhere to put anybody, because there won't be any more hostels or there won't be any more hotels. And I think I'm not naive and not stupid. I grew up literally on a peace lane in North Belfast. I have a daughter who crosses 3 peace lanes just to get to school in the morning, between North and West Belfast. But I would sincerely hope that in her future that she could choose to live somewhere without fear or threat of violence or othering, or what chapel do you go to, what school did you go to, what's your surname, all of that. And yes, it's relatively peaceful, but at what cost does peace come? Do you know what I mean? If we're not talking about the social, cultural and economic rights of people, and it is about our rights. But again, I totally understand what you're asking, but I do think that we need to look at these contested spaces and do what we've done at Mackey's, talk to people on either side of that piece of land and ask what they want, because they're the people that are in need. They should be asked, and many of them have never been asked their opinion. They've took part in consultations that were already, pre-agreed. So I do think, just Liz, from what you're saying, it has to be the only way forward, or I don't see how we're ever going to fix the current crisis.
What has to be the way forward? So that's my question, really. But anyway, well, listen.
Okay, I think Marianne wants to add something.
Just very briefly, one of the things that Liz does very well in her book, and it's come up both in this gentleman's question, that there is no historical understanding amongst planners of the history of planning in Northern Ireland. I was very struck. I've already written about the ridiculousness of the plan that ended up with all this motorway and dividing up, you know, and everybody that writes about the origin of the Troubles says that the mismanagement and misunderstanding that led to slum clearance and the development of Belfast that divided, you know, particularly that community, the lower north into the city, divided them from the centre of the city. Now, that already happened way back, you know, in the Matthew Plan, 1950s, 1960s. And what I want to say is this, and I picked it up, and you do it very well in your book. We always talk about identity in this part of the world. Well, one of the identity crises that's always been the case here is the sense of inferiority, even amongst unionist politicians, vis-a-vis Britain, mainland Britain. And so they keep inviting in so-called experts from over there, from anywhere except locally. And the same happened in Europe. I mean, I noticed it when I was working on the earlier thing. You say a lot about it. All these big firms with ideas, you know, great ideas about their planning and their nice things, and they know nothing about the areas. And I'm just thinking, but this has happened before. Has nobody within those planning authorities they could do with appointing a historian? You know, this, you know, could they not learn from all these mistakes? Because reading yours, I was thinking, yes, they did the same. They would bring in all these experts from everywhere else, except from here. Yeah. And you found out, you know, lots of money was being just lost with these kind of shiny plans that, you know, and so sorry, I just wanted to add that. And if anybody is working here within local government or a government, if we ever have it back, just wish somebody would take that on board, because all these mistakes have been made before. I mean, millions and millions have been lost because they just don't like involving local people.
It's a question, but it's also just a wee bit of who I am and what I was involved holistic on the project. I'm Janice. I work in Laurel Park. I've lived there 54 years, and it was great. I'm commending on your work, and obviously there's things in the book that probably I won't agree with, whatever. But you started off, Marianne, with the issue around the housing, and that first of all, my hat was go up. I have to say, because there's young academics here that don't see people on the ground who live there either, and for me, Girdwood was contentious around the housing, and it was a Sinn Féin agenda. For us, it was a Sinn Féin agenda to put the housing on, because Margaret Ritchie came in at that point and says, we're going to put 200 houses on, and that's, of course, we get heard about it. Straight away, gets a hackles up between the Protestant communities and the nationalist communities. Living at an interface, it's still an interface. My house was attacked 2 weeks ago. I live with kids beside me, literally 10 foot away on a daily basis. We had to see the dividend of the peace process. For us, it was vital that two things, that the houses didn't go there for the protection of the Protestant community, because we were being pushed back. We were living in deprivation. They started regenerating the houses in 1980, demolished the whole community and built not even half of it back. We're still sitting today with dirt land. We're waiting six years to get 12 social houses built. We're now sitting waiting we're literally at a standpoint with the housing executive, because they won't put clauses in that we can't get landlords. We want to block the landlords coming in. We want to build the community. It's years of regeneration, years of dereliction, and then we have a small party of people who've got the skills, and it's constant fighting with the statutory agencies. The politicians are just useless at this point in time, and I tell them that to their faces. They created that environment for us, and you know, you've seen the people, you've seen the areas, and really sometimes not much change. But Girdwood is the worst of two evils. It is a white elephant. Now there's 4 phases. They're now on the second phase. We're looking at 19.5 million for investment around, it's called an indoor sports, leisure, time facilities, all the sports stuff you want. There's an expression that just now for the mixed use site around creative jobs and things like that. And then the last one will never be done is the houses for on the Protestant community, because we're forgotten community. I feel as a resident living there, it's turned around. The issue is the Protestants are living in deprivation much more. And I know there's great need. You launched, and I was part of that inquiry way back before you were. I'm not saying it's about a news thing.
Thanks.
But I was there, and you know, the new launch is horrendous what people are living in. But there are also, the people aren't aware. When you go to the housing networks, we have a housing officer there. There's people in need, but they're actually refusing the houses because they want better. They want to live in an old house, and they want a brand new house. So there is people in need, but they're actually refusing houses, and there's a big amount of that on the agenda as well. But so the work goes on, and you know, we fight the fight as best we can, because we want to create. Girdwood was good for me, and that was the second and last point, was the kids met on the interface, were getting beat up, constantly nice to the fact. We had riots, we had standoff for parades going up through the years, and we wanted a space for the kids to go into that was safe. And that space is safe, it's safe-ish for some people, still not the attacks, but it's the worst of two evils. It is a white elephant, and council will continue to put money into it. They class it as a peace and reconciliation centre, as the youth workers. I don't see it as that. It's a dry leisure centre until I see peace. But we fight to have that. Peace doesn't happen by just sitting there. We have to fight until we see it as a peace and reconciliation centre. There's good work being done, but there's also the fight for people in our communities, and we come together, and you know, it's important that we do fight for proper housing, for proper education and everything else, but it has to be done that it's not one community against the other. Thank you.
And thank you, Janice, for saying that and for sharing that. Because even though I think it just speaks to, you know, Girdwood is one case, but it just speaks to the overwhelming failure of the politicians. You know, it's disgraceful, because there is good work being done on the ground, and there are good things happening, but they can only happen to a certain level because
from the people on the ground, it's not the politicians, it's from grounds up.
And I really wanted, and that's why I wanted to write the book, because I feel like I want these conversations to happen more, particularly in these kind of spaces, you know, that this needs to be documented, that there is good work being done on the ground by people, and the politicians have failed in so many ways, all of which I are in great detail in the book. But thank you, I agree.
Thank you. I'm finishing my PhD here, in history, but my other hat is that I'm a housing activist with CATU. And it's really interesting to be in this space and to see people. There's somebody in this room who I first met at a sit-in eviction resistance in North Belfast a few weeks ago. I've seen Marissa talk before. And I just kind of wanted to ask you about writing an academic book. You kind of touched on it then, working with activists and community, because I don't think we collaborate enough between activists and academics. So I wanted to ask you both about that experience and kind of the importance of that for this.
It's something I've thought a lot about, because, you know, first of all, I'm not from here, and I think, you know, particularly, you know, I struggle to class myself what discipline I am, but when I was trained, you know, as an anthropologist, and of course, I think, you know, in anthropology and here, this is a very over-researched place. There's a tradition of helicopter research where somebody comes in, they get their data, they write their book, and they're, you know, away on their career. And I never wanted to do that. It just didn't even cross my mind to do that. You know, I really, really cared about the story of Girdwood. And I am the first person to say I couldn't have done this research or wrote this book without the generosity of people, you know, on the ground who were willing to let me, you know, be there for it and be there for the whole process. You know, I think that there is a tradition too in academia of you know, lip service perhaps to community work, where it's like, oh, you know, I talked to this community member, that's great. I've done participatory action research. And I would disagree with that as well. I think, it takes a long time, and it takes a long time to do this kind of research. I hope to the very best of my ability. I'm just really grateful that people accepted me and supported me and saw that I wanted to document this story and all the injustices that were happening. And the other thing I struggle with as somebody who works in the academic space now is the cost of the book. It's expensive. Most people can't afford to buy it. I can't afford to buy my own book at the minute. But seriously, I wanted to write it, and of course it will be available at libraries and institutions. And so that's good. It's there. It's something that people can use as a resource. But I've also been working, writing blogs and doing podcasts and, giving a copy of this book to everyone I worked with during the project, everyone I interviewed during the project, because, I think it can be tough with academia. It's like it is a power structure where it's difficult to access this knowledge sometimes. And so any way that we can think about, well, how do we distill this knowledge so that more people can access it? That's what I hope I can do with this work, but also in my current work as well.
Yeah, so and just on that, we are very conscious that we work with people who are real people, and we get requests as an organisation. I think they stop telling us now how many people are asking, and as much as we want to expose our stuff and people to that world, and sometimes, and we've learned in the past that it can be more harmful than good as well. So for us, and as somebody who's attempting to write a PhD whilst being an activist and going, where do I fit? What happens now? It can be quite difficult, but we're so fortunate to work with people from Queen's, like Augustina and her department, and people who have come in and are part of the coalition. And I think that the coalition is a big part of where Take Back the City have got to, because it brings in all those voices. But at the bottom and at the top and at the middle and all through that is the people who are most in need.
Yeah.
And I do think
valuable as well. I've used the website in classes myself. It's just so good.
the website is so good.
I can't take it. That's not. I'll say thanks anyway, but that's our Desi doing that. But thanks.
but I definitely, I think there are brilliant examples of these kind of collaborations happening. Even the fact we're all together in this room right now, you know what I mean? Like, having these conversations. So.
Right. Thank you very much. Could you say something a bit about the way educational planning did or didn't fit into this project? And I mean, what would the implications of building 200 houses on the site have been if they had been built? Would the schools in the existing area have been able to accommodate the likely number of children? Would it have required building a new school, or maybe 3 new schools, state, Catholic maintained, integrated?
I mean, I have to say that that wasn't the primary focus of my research with this piece, and it didn't necessarily come up when I went through, I went through all of the planning documents from the first phase of the site, all of the meeting records. There are several schools in the area, but I can't really speak to the specifics of the educational catchment areas because it just didn't come up that much in the written record. So.
Yeah, thanks for a great presentation. In your opening remarks, you said part of the reason why things turned out as poorly as they did was Sinn Féin's ability to compromise or the compromises they made. Can you give some more details about that?
Yeah, I think for a long time there was a really uncomfortable dynamic between the DUP and Sinn Féin, and it's been termed many things, a shared out process or a deal process whereby the DUP and Sinn Féin would kind of have these backroom agreements, and some of them do come up in the Girdwood development process. I would say oftentimes it felt that the DUP there would be an element of intransigence, and then Sinn Féin would kind of make some sort of weak and ineffectual compromise in order to keep things limping along and to kind of keep the institutions functioning. But I wonder if Marianne or Marissa might have something on that as well.
Oh, what we call the sectarian carve-up. Yeah, that came as a surprise to me in your book. We don't often hear about the DUP and Sinn Féin agreeing, but they did, didn't they? And two big parties sold out the Girdwood area because, well, it was, she doesn't pull any punches. And I know the local DUP politician very well, whose area it was, or if there'd been, Janice, if there'd been, and yeah, because the housing need, and you're quite right, declining Protestant community, and if I'd be allowed at the end of this, I don't want to take up too much time to talk about how mixed this area once was until quite recently. But it would have changed the electoral role if that, because most of the houses would have gone to Catholics because that's where the main housing need is. And it was patently obvious that the DUP probably would have lost out. Now, I don't know the ins and outs of how they persuaded Sinn Féin to go along, but reading your book, and tell me if I'm wrong, that Sinn Féin were more interested in the area that had been the maze, and that, and I don't know, did you read, there must have been secret negotiations going on, because we think, they're loggerheads, but of course, from your book, they're not. They were agreeing to kind of downplay the importance of Girdwood, so that Sinn Féin would, and it was the sectarian carve-up that we keep hearing about, I mean, it's well, if you're even only interested in politics, it's very well worth reading just for that. I went, oh my goodness, so yeah, that's, I don't know, what did you ask me to, somebody asked me to talk, did you ask me to say something? Did you ask me to say something? Have I gone on?
I mean, you could go on forever about it.
No, I know, but it's your evening. But if I could just ask you, Marissa and Liz and Janice, isn't it?
Yes.
So I come from North Belfast, so does my sister, my whole family for generations. And North Belfast, way from the 19th century onwards, was historically the most mixed part of Belfast. And it was something we were always very proud of. So there was mixed living, throughout North Belfast. And what I wanted to ask you was this, and in fact, actually, I mean, this area backs up, because I remember meeting a wonderful women's group. I used to meet them regularly when I was sitting on the Upside Commission at the bottom of the Cliftonville Road. And they'd grown up in, the area of North Belfast that essentially we're talking about. And it was mixed. And because of the Troubles, they were divided, but became segregated. And these women were very worried that their children, they'd kept the friendship going, but their children would never know mixed living. That was way back in 1992, 1993. And what I wanted to ask you is there no movement at all in North Belfast about trying to get back to what traditionally for centuries had been a mixed area?
North Belfast is so contentious as a patchwork, and I mean, in the 70s, I was in primary school, and even then, Liverpool Primary School, which is not intermediate school, it's had the Troubles, and we had to go through, to be across where it became semi-nationalist, and we were attacked as kids going to primary school even back then. And that's what I don't remember. I remember when we saying that in the street, we moved into the street we're in now, Book Street, 54 years next month. And she said there was Protestant people that they moved out,
that's what
put out when the Trouble started. I've lived in a predominantly Protestant area all my life. It doesn't stop me.
So there's going to be no memory of the mix?
No, I just remember cross-community projects with summer schemes and go down to the nuns down in Dublin and different things like that. Cross-community bring kids together, but then when you go back home, you went into your own wee silo. But there was people working together. There's Protestants and Catholics used to go to their Protestant friends' bonfires way back in the 60s. There was time then, but we lost all that. I mean, way back in the 70s in our community.
It's terrible. Well,
we had, internal feuds, never mind against the Catholic community. So it's been different for us.
And what about nature working? Is there no enthusiasm at all for?
And the people that we work, where I live right now, I see the kids getting on the bus, and it's sad that this is the way you differentiate, but you're looking at the school uniforms getting on a 12C bus, and it's a total mix between, like, my daughter goes to college the first year over in West Belfast. There's girls model, boys model, St Malachy's and Dominick's. So where I live, and I don't know if it's because I'm up a hill and most of the houses are owned, so it's the whole class thing comes into this as well. Not that I'm anything but working class, by the way. It just so happens that that's where I'm living. And then kids are getting on the bus, some wearing a GA kit, some carrying a hockey stick. Again, we're differentiating between certain sports and what they're perceived to be. And there's absolutely no issues, like zero issues where I live. And then you go down that hill and you get to Ballysillan, and then you go through, you know what I mean? That's it. It's back into predominantly Protestant, predominantly segregated. But we're working with groups of women from the Schenkel, groups of women from the Falls, and everywhere in between. Groups of women coming into this country from Sudan and Yemen and everywhere in between, who are genuinely not focused on that bigger political picture and the silo that goes on, and just how are we going to feed our kids? How are we heating our homes? How do we get sustainable energy? How do we grow our own food? What more can we be doing? And that's genuinely what we focus on. But unfortunately, I don't see anywhere. And then, you know, as you're saying, Janice, about internal feuds, you people going, and they can't live in certain areas, and there's, you know, signs put up that it's for local people only, and so then we need to be talking about that as well, and how do people move forward, and how do you create a mixed community or a shared space, and mean it.
That's coming from the young people, because the young people are doing it, because they are meeting, they're going to integrated schools and they are meeting. It's just the small groups are coming. When you find they're starting a new school, integrated school, then immediately interface, whatever it is known for. You don't, if you're in it, even if you're in the Royal Park, you don't ring and say, there's an incident happening in the Royal Park, you mentioned Girdwood, and you started that. That's how you do it. And they come directly. It's a spot that they will want to come to. So it's coming for the young, it'll be for the young kids, but there's young kids who are still growing up with that hatred and being told Catholics and Protestants. When Girdwood first opened, it was unusual just to see people coming in, and you get in over the, because there's like a big hall and there's seats, tiered seats to go around. It's like there's one big long seats, and well, the uniforms and you know all this. It was funny to watch, but I mean there is good things happen to her. There is just the Girdwood and council invest a lot of money, but it's just going to take time.
But this is why we need people like Liz DeYoung, because Liz doesn't carry any of our baggage.
No, exactly.
And people like you have been able to kind of come in and
she gained the trust from people.
Exactly.
It was the fact that she was there, you were there for a very long time.
Yeah.
Because when the first time you came, it was like, well, she really needs to be here for part of that meeting, because they didn't know who you were or what you were going to say. And slowly but surely you were introduced to more meetings, and it all became very open. It's trust, you know, but not trust.
Yeah, and thank you for trusting me. Seriously.
We have time for one last question.
Yeah, I think it's a marvellous piece of work that you've done, and I think the legacy, I hope, will be the influence it brings on the developments of the Mackey site and the lessons that have been learned. And I just wondered, particularly everyone's speaking about the divided communities and what's happening in the heritage of North Belfast as being a very mixed community. Did you take into account at any time, because I haven't been able to read your expensive book yet, the initiatives in terms of TBUC, you know, the building, you know, sharing united communities, and trying to look at the common selection scheme and some of the planning issues, the big set pieces that actually do influence the makeup of social housing, the allocation of it, and how these communities are built and are sustainable. Was there any exploration of those issues, because they will be relevant to the Mackey's development?
I mean, I did do a lot of research on the different policies at different phases of the development and kind of that broader political context that was shaping decisions around the site. And so, you know, I don't know that I have time to go into all of them, because, you know, there were plenty of them. But, you know, for instance, I did note that there was a shift from, in terms of language, in terms of objectives in community relations policy, TBUC, for instance, you know, that was very much a DUP Sinn Féin back and forth trade-off, and the language was very different was very much more about mutual accommodation rather than the previous community relations strategy, a shared future, which was based more on transformation or, more kind of optimistic aims. So, I suppose the research takes all of those policies and strategies, and I looked into all of them and literally was looking at, the difference in wording for all of them, and then kind of mapping onto how does that shape how the politicians are making decisions around the land. So that was my intention, to kind of bring the policy and weave it in with, the land use stuff and the ethnographic, field notes. So that was my approach, and to what extent I've been successful, I think. But
I've read the whole book.
But
yeah, she's been successful.
But there was a strong policy element, because I thought it was important to kind of contrast those shifts over time.
Well, thank you all very much. This is the end of the formal bit of proceedings, but we do have wine and nibbles just outside, so we invite people to stay and to talk more informally to Marianne, Liz, and Marissa, and celebrate with Liz the publication of this really important